Hello, folks. My name is Wayne O'Connor, and I'm here from Sligo Gaming Society. And tonight we're going to have some of us have a little chat about role-playing games, but particularly we're going to be looking at game mastering. So with the resurgence in popularity of things like Dungeons and Dragons and a wealth of new editions of old games and new starter sets, it's never been easier to try and get into this aspect of tabletop gaming. And while it's generally easier to get in as a player, game mastering is a bigger investment of time and work, and we're going to just kind of chat about our own kind of approaches to that and maybe some little tips about that. So without further ado, I'll just introduce you to the other two individuals on this call. So I'll hand it over to maybe Dave first. So Dave, just give us who are you, and maybe what we might get you to tell us is a little short, like what was your introduction to RPGs, player or GM, or what was the game that got you into this aspect of tabletop gaming?
Cool. So I'm Dave McGowan, and it's good to be back. We talked a little bit about board gaming and stuff last time, and I did touch a little bit on how I got into it. So I suppose specifically for me, the introduction to role-playing games was actual role-playing game was the D&D black box, the new easy to master
Yes.
I actually have here beside me, but the box isn't really suitable for picking up and showing. It's showing its age, but I might pull out some bits and pieces from that. So that was my introduction, and because I owned it, I ended up GMing for the first time I ever played an RPG, and since then forever have been cursed to continue to do so. That's the way these things work.
Very good. Very good. Okay, and then we'll go over to first time in one of our little chats. Jude, introduce yourself, and what was your introduction to RPGs?
Yeah,
player or GM or whatever.
Yeah, I'm Jude. My first introduction to RPGs was also D&D. I got invited to a friend's house to try out Dungeons and Dragons. My Wood Elf Ranger Aeolus in AD&D. Started what would end up being a 19-year campaign that I believe Dave was a part of at a certain point. That a friend of ours ran in Sligo. So,
what was that?
As was Wayne. We played the same session, I believe.
Did we? Oh my God, I can't remember this. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Well, people got dragged in and out of that. But obviously from there it went on to particularly into the World of Darkness. That particularly caught fire with me in the 90s. And a few friends of ours, we rotated DMing on a weekly basis. So people came to my house, we rotated who was DMing, and that started off, the game mastery, as it were, for me, and a position I would just get wrangled into regularly.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so yeah, normally I kind of sit back to a degree and let you guys chat and interject every now and again. But yeah, I'm one of the people in the line here tonight. So myself, I would actually trace my introduction to the concept of role-playing games to the Choose Your Own Adventure books, which we've mentioned before, and I loved those. And then at some point I picked up the magazine GM, and it had an article. It was a magazine all about gaming, and it had an article about other aspects of gaming, and one of them was things like D&D and all this stuff, and the idea of taking that concept of being kind of in charge of your own character storytelling, but in a group, and introduced me that there was games, and that's what I heard of D&D. But actually, funnily enough, even though the red set was going to be my first kind of proper full thing, I actually bought this book in a bookshop, and I can't even recall the name of it. It was like something, The Great, and it's not The Great and Secret Show. I know it's a Clive Barker book, but it was something like The Great Horror Show or something. But it was basically a volume of like an RPG rule set in there. It was a werewolf story, so one of the twists in it was that one of the players was actually meant to be the werewolf, and I had
Spoilers.
this. Yeah. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was actually cool. It was like a book. There was about 200 pages in it, paperback thing, and I just picked it and I tried to run it. It was a disaster, but it was enough just to get me like, okay, this is kind of cool. And then I went and got the red box set for D&D, and like Dave said, yeah, I was thrust into GMing from the outset. Okay.
Can I cut in there just because you mentioned them? I kind of skipped over it myself because technically it's not a role playing game. But exactly the same experience that those books, the D&D ones in particular, the Return to Brookmere was the first one I got.
Oh, yes.
Like, so good, and literally I am still stealing from it to this day. I don't know if anyone who plays my homebrew campaign, but there's an amulet called the Mouth of Mimulus, if you remember him. He's this grumpy old amulet that your hero finds, and he just kind of barks at you and bitches at you through the whole book.
Serious.
Amazing, really, really good. I use him in my own games.
When I wrote my first, and I mean, I'll get on this, I'll come back to this, but when I wrote my first like scenario for myself, I actually did write them. I didn't just write a few notes and things. I would actually write the full text descriptions. I would actually write the all in detail of what might happen, but they were kind of actually modeled on the choose your own adventure books. Because literally at the end, it usually came down to, do they want to go into this door or that door? Because I was just doing dungeon adventures, so, and I'd have literally turn to section whatever. So I used to have copybooks full of these things. Now my approach these days is a lot less prepared. What have you got? Oh, it's kind of blanking out. You've got something there.
I literally, it's in my box here, and it's the first dungeon that I ever made.
Oh, no way.
If I can give you an extract, this is the kind of caliber of stuff.
Go for it.
Room 75. The room is empty. In brackets, a magical flame engulfs you. Save against dragon breath, 1d6 damage. That's the room. That's the whole description.
Well, I have lots of questions.
Yeah. So, well, there's something like, so yeah, that was my first thing. Dave, obviously, Jude, what was your first, like, in terms of writing a scenario, or did you write your own stuff, or did you go homebrew from the outset, or did you use pre-printed kind of stuff?
No, it was homebrew early on. Now I'm currently a big advocate of printed works, but I started off, particularly when you look at the non-D&D RPGs like World of Darkness, like Legends of Five Rings, Traveler. There's so much less printed stuff for them in terms of adventures that you kind of had to. You were kind of compelled to create your own stories and stuff like that. And yeah, the first game I ran was Vampire, and I had to work out this political intrigue in this massive flowchart. And I sat on my bedroom floor with like 5 colors of markers, drawing like who was connected to who. And I'm like, I look back and I go like, I spent so much time that was probably wasted, but I had fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I would, same as I would like sit down and write these things for days before I'd meet my friends, and I'd be drawn, as David's trying to explain, like I'd have the maps drawn. I mean, obviously, because I'm an artist, like I was drawing the characters, these shitty little black and white drawings of all the characters and monsters they're going to meet, and anything I could get. But like I put in a lot of time into the sessions. These days, a little bit less. So I think that's one of the reasons that I too kind of have definitely been doing more pre-printed stuff. You just don't have as much time for sitting down and writing this stuff out. It is nice in some of the new stuff, particularly D&D, that I like the sandbox adventures a little bit, because there's a little bit more freedom to kind of throw in a few things. I'm particularly enjoying the Icewind Dale at the moment, because there's a plot going on, but there's very much a lot of like little subplots you can do and stuff like that.
The 10 towns beginning to that story is great, because it doesn't even say which town you start in. It's like, here you go. There's a huge lake in Icewind Dale and 10 towns around it. Yeah, have at it.
Yeah, and I mean, not to particularly stay on that one, but I'm definitely enjoying it because there's so much content in it. There's so many subplots and subquests I haven't got into. But again, just don't have time for writing all that myself, so it's great. It's all there. I can just do a little bit of joining the dots and stuff. Dave, what about you? Is it you're still the kind of homebrew? You're still kind of in the homebrew.
I am, but I face the same kind of time issue. So I'm kind of halfway house. I liberally steal pre-printed materials from ideas, something Matt Colville said on YouTube, or something from a Critical Role campaign. I liberally steal bits and pieces.
There is some what's the quote from? Creativity is hiding your sources, Dave. So it's all cool.
Exactly, when I would have done that same slog of like, and I remember specifically when I had the D&D book, and I had it came with like a pamphlet-sized monster manual, nothing like kind of the fancy ones we have today, but it was literally just a list. I don't even know. I don't know if it had pictures. I think there might have been tiny little pictures beside it, but I would just go pour over these monsters, like agonizing over which monster should go in room 52, and this huge amount of work in it. And I would never in a million years do that now. Never in a million years.
And in terms, I'm just thinking, like, we're obviously talking a lot about D&D, and D&D actually, I think the whole dungeon crawl is a big thing everyone's done, and it's, to some degree, it's easy to kind of go draw a map and here's some room. If you want to, I mean, a lot of us probably did that as a very first, but there's obviously a lot more RPGs these days. There's a lot more RPGs where there's not really dungeons in them, and they're more, I mean, do they still need that yet? I mean, I can't see myself doing that approach with Call of Cthulhu. With Call of Cthulhu, there's a plot, there's a mystery. I think I need to sit down and actually have this worked out if I'm doing a homebrew. Again, if I can buy the scenario, happy days. But
I think it was a long time for me before I realized that there were games where you didn't have to do that. That it wasn't a big part of it. Like cut my teeth on D&D. I played a couple of games. I've played it. They were all terrible, uniformly terrible. Like your first, I suspect it's a universal truth that like your first GMing game is just going to be bad, or at least you will feel that it is bad. Okay,
yeah.
It's just important to do it. But D&D was the first, and playing that with family and friends and stuff, and then Shadowrun came along, and I mean, this opened up my mind, because to me, role playing was Dungeons and Dragons, and I think to a lot of people it probably still is to some extent.
Yeah,
Shadowrun came along, and I fell in love with the setting. I actually read a book, a novella based on Shadowrun. I had no idea it was an RPG, and then saw it at the time the Virgin store on there, and saw this book there. And I'm like, wait, that's Shadowrun. What's this game stuff? What's it doing beside the D&D? Found this book. But again, the rule set for this is so heavy and it's so complicated with all the different threats and different levels you can approach things. There was no choice but to actually go through and design those out. And I spent a lot of time doing that same thing, building games that would never get played in Shadowrun, just again, because I love that material.
What about you, Jude? Like for obviously non-D&D, is there a different approach? Do you have a different approach? Is it more planned?
Yeah, like I will say, I do think modern D&D has moved away from that anyways. But I think the concept all RPGs have moved towards are that the duality of the political role play versus combat. That you have your time allotted for be it politics, be it RPG, just feeling out the world, and then combat. And combat is separate, And Dungeons and Dragons, the combat was the dungeons, and I think that's why in modern D&D adventures, with a couple of exceptions, you tend to see shorter, sharper dungeons. So it's like you go in, you have a couple of encounters, you're out, you continue on the plot.
It's a location on the plot. Yeah.
Exactly, on the plot line. So, but again, yeah, you start with D&D, and it's very much a dungeon thing, and then you hit vampire, and vampire is like, what's a dungeon? It's the modern world. It's all political intrigue. You've got combat, but for combat, it's on the streets, it's in the parks, it's, and it's you go to Warhammer Fantasy, and then you're like, well, I want to avoid combat at all costs because I suck. I rolled a rat catcher, you named Boris, and I can't do anything,
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
like, that's why, there are games that excel at political intrigue. There are games that excel at exploration. They all have a little bit of everything, but I think the modern game has moved towards telling a story.
Absolutely.
Above the old tenet of, dungeons or dungeon equivalents in the world, or whatever it might be, futuristic dungeons, abandoned space hulks, to telling a story that also has elements of the past in it. So.
To be honest, I don't know if it's a deliberate subconscious. I've stopped calling them role-playing games. I tend to call them storytelling games. Even when I'm trying to explain to someone who's never played a role-playing game, I don't try to call it role-playing, because it seems to still kind of like, what, role-play? I have to what? And I go, no, this is a storytelling game. We're gonna tell a story together. And definitely, as you just said, like that definitely fits the modern kind of thing. There's a background noise.
Funny actually that D&D is an introduction, particularly in the past. Now, as you say, Jude, it's moved to a more narrativist style game. So you go heading in that direction. The complexity, it's actually quite complex as games go. Like nowadays, you can pick up any number of games, and the rules are a handful of pages, compared to like a tome for this, a tome for that, a tome for this. We're playing a game at the moment, right, with Tech Noir, which is again a rules light Shadowrun equivalent, which I'm running a one shot over 20 days. But again, the system itself is very simple. There's no combat system in it. There's just simply the system of dice and how you influence the story. And it's very much about like even making combat part of the storyline, part of the rules help develop the story. Whereas, and I think the mistake that I certainly made when I started off with D&D was, if I know all these rules, the great story will happen. Do you know what I mean? Like just having the mechanics will make the thing happen. And the mechanics were never designed to make the thing happen, barring, a handful of things around critical hits perhaps, or the excitement of getting that. I'm not even sure, was that a thing back in those days? I've it all blurred now. But
crits. Were crits, and there was always the
Chainmail had crits, I presume, the first.
There you go.
I think it always did. Yeah.
I've got the rules here. I could pour through it, but
it's the crits in Woofrup or L5R that I remember the most, because they're the ones where like it's instant death is a possibility,
Dude.
or
limb loss or what have you. It's
Jude, we're not going to completely dwell on the fantasy, but I remember, like I played D&D up until college. D&D was the only RPG. I was aware there was some other on the periphery, but I hadn't played them. So my first non-D&D was Cthulhu. That it was ran as a one shot, and I went, this is great. I loved it. And then my first non D&D book that I bought was of all ones, it was Mage the Ascension, which I love it, but it's not exactly user friendly. It's fairly like, it's kind of a.
I think it comes back to that thing about the rules heaviness, rules lightness, and then the narrativeness. And I think, from playing games, I've played games with both of you guys, and I think from my perspective, played those initial games. Like for me, what happened to turn on role playing was joining in the Game Society in IT back in Sligo back in the day, and meeting you guys and seeing how different people ran their games, because the only GM I'd ever seen was me. And seeing how different people ran their games, and it was like a light bulb. It was just like oh, I get it. We're telling stories. It's pithy, but that's basically what it was. In particular, when to drop a couple of names, like the Star Wars that we ran.
Oh yeah,
which was just so cinematic, and absolutely blatantly ripped off.
Absolutely, Indiana and even the ending was 633 Squadron, which is kind of ripped off from in the movies anyway.
I just remember, like, all of us kind of, we're doing dice roll. We're literally sitting in the cafeteria in the college, rolling dice, and we're all standing around the table, leaning. It was just fantastic.
I just remember I was driving home with Jason that night, Jason McGarry, one of our friends, and we were all buzzing because I think it literally came down to the last roll, and they were trying to move us out. We're like, oh, we have to get this finished. And it was like, that was a good one. That was a good one.
And that what was my point about that? One of the things that I noticed, or I took note of, and a lot of the time when you're playing games, I came from this background of like, have to know every rule in the book. That has to be the thing. And you slightly
you couldn't get someone more opposite.
Hold on.
let's just start and we'll figure it out as we go along. The Wayne O'Connor motto.
Like, and I think that when you mentioned Mage, we played a couple of games of Mage, and I think again you've taken the essence of the thing and brought it to a level. It's as a player, sometimes I would get frustrated. It's like, I have an ability that does things, and I need this to be in a combat round. But at the end of the thing, I'd always go, that was a great story, and we had a great time, and that's key, I think. And it's about finding the balance, letting the game system express itself, getting enough of its character in there that you know what you're playing, but at the same time going, look, the important thing is that we're all enjoying this, that we're all having
That's
fun and
yeah.
telling.
You know
stories.
that's the real thing at the end of the day. And I think this is kind of a little bit what, you know, we all have our own different styles. I do it the way I do it. Everyone has their different approach, and I've sat at tables with people who have a completely different approach to me in terms of like they're sitting down, they're counting out the minis, which isn't the kind of thing I personally get into, but I've enjoyed those games just as much, you know. And I was like, okay, yeah, you know. So it's a balanced thing, and maybe it's also like a little bit of reading your group of players.
Yeah.
Like some people want
absolutely.
to, you know, some people want to, as you just said, I've got this ability, and you want to play to them as well because they want to do that thing, you know.
I think that, and I'm sorry to cut across you, I think it's an important point. Is I think the most important, if we're talking about kind of games mastering, I think the most important skill for a games master is reading the table.
Absolutely.
They will look at the people and saying, "Are you having fun? Are you getting lost?" I know, in particular, like you, we've been playing Tomb of Annihilation and all that, and there's a lot going on. You're getting into these dense combats. You're getting these people working through traps and stuff. And dude's very much like someone's not getting any airtime. You ask the question of the character, "What's your character doing?" Just to pull people in and keep it going. And it's great. And you know you're in good hands, I think, when you can see that kind of behavior going with the GM, kind of going, let's keep this, give everyone their airtime, because that's what it is. You all want to be part of the story. That's part of the whole beauty of the thing. You get to do something. And some players are quite happy to sit back and just tip along, but you have to have the opportunities.
And it is important to know, right? You do have groups of people that behave differently as a group. And I think the best example I have of this is my own system. I wrote a game back when I used to write games for GailCon. And Dave ran one table and I ran the other. And it was about these superhero sextuplets called Harry, Barry, Larry, Gary, Carrie, and Bob.
Okay.
And they basically all had superpower. They were the superhero sextuplets. They were fighting the sinister sexophilist. Everything was alliterative in the game. It was a comedy superhero game. And all the siblings had powers, but the powers depended on who was sitting to their left and to their right at the table.
Oh, I remember you. Yeah, I didn't
And
play it, but I remember this.
my table got asked repeatedly to shut up because my guys were screaming and running around. They were laughing. They were having a good time, but they were like very much like full on energy. And meanwhile, you couldn't hear Dave's table, who kept glancing over our way, wondering why we were screaming all the time. Both games I think were good, but you had two different energies at the table, and I think good GM plays to the energy they have, you know. And you take
I'm pretty sure it was terrible, Jude. I have no recollection of it whatsoever. So that's probably it's probably pretty bad.
Back in the day, we were constantly dragged into each other's RPGs that we were running at cons. It was like,
was this at Confest or something? I remember you telling me about that concept, and I loved it.
Oh, it ran again at Confest.
I ran like four scenarios of it, so I don't know which one was
great idea. Great idea.
Oh, it was very funny. It was very funny, but yeah.
So I've got some. So obviously, just so when it comes to sitting down at a table to set up a game or whatever, we've talked about, you know, a little bit about the prep, or how we prep a little bit less these days. But what kind of particular things do you like to bring to the table? Now, obviously, we're in a different time now, but this will come in as well. Like if you're playing digitally, is there particular things you like to use in terms of visuals, in terms of sharing screenshots, in terms of what the tabletop audio, I think, is another one, soundtrack, you know. So what kind of stuff do you like to bring to the table? Jude, I guess straight off, I'm probably thinking in terms of you even said it to me during the week in a text, you regard yourself as a very visual GM. So how does this work for you?
Yeah, so I will preface by saying, like, theater of the mind is king. You know, there are games that can only function in theater of the mind. But a game like D&D, which marries sort of like the grid-like combat, opens the way for gamers who want to have that sort of visual tabletop experience to do that. And that very much appeals to me. You know, I like to have, you know, my miniature buildings. You know, I like to have my models. I like my players to sit down and then this appears at the table, you know, beside them. So for me, I like to, if I can, when I am playing at the table, obviously things have changed. I try to alternate week between a heavy role-playing session where what I'll have on the table is maybe a few buildings, a few trees, a backdrop to what they're playing, you know, like here's a piece of the countryside or whatever. And then alternate the next week to a very like grid-based, intensive, you know, elongated combat session and then alternate back again, so they're going through sort of like alternating sessions, carrying the plot, but also having use of the table and the minis. And that's for me, like, I really enjoyed that. You don't need it. The great thing about role playing is you need the core book, the paper and pencil, and some dice. But I like the show. I
You don't
like
even need that, right? D&D, right? You can actually get the basic rules for free.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, I like the show. I like the minis and the models. I like it to look. I like my players to sit down at something they go ooh at when they sit down and have a poke about to see if they can find things on the table. So I've come from a long history of just having the books and having people sit around. But with D&D in particular, if I can, I've got stuff on the table, and I will. That comes down to pretty much everything. Like, I'll have my DM screen. I'll be very much I'd say a visual gamer, and I think with the way the world is, that kind of rolled into it too. So we obviously moved online, but I use Roll20 because I can buy the modules there. They've got the pre-built maps. I can show people images of the monsters they're
Fog of
facing.
War things, yeah.
Yeah, again, it can be completely run like this over Zoom, absolutely, and 100% successfully. But I personally, and the sort of person that is like, here's what a Modron looks like, and that might be a trigger word for Dave lately.
Poor little guy.
But I like to, particularly when I'm dealing with players who maybe are playing for the first time, or they haven't been playing long, or they don't particularly know the world very well. I like to be able to say, this is what a mind flare looks like. Okay, this is a cute mind flare, but this is what they look like. So yeah, to me, I would say I would paint myself as the visual,
Yeah.
Game master.
What about you, Dave? Same kind of. Is there anything? Again, is it props? Is there anything that you like to get to the table if you get a chance to, depending on your scenarios? Is it handouts? Is it music? Is it what kind of stuff?
Yeah, if I have a in-person physical table, I do like to have to hand any. If I have time to prep, I'll try to prep any props that I can use. A letter, a coins, anything that might physically interact with the players and give them something physical to look at. I'm not huge on. I don't have space for a lot of minis, and
I don't either. That doesn't stop me, Dave.
You're a consideration. There are other people in the house who are not as willing to have a bunch of these things around as I might be, but I like to have stuff that people can interact with and use. I do like to have a grid, just for combats and just for like a flat grid. I've a wipe clean one that I can draw very quickly, a cave system or rooms or whatever it is, just to get the geography of a place, because it's difficult to like explain, particularly in something like D&D where tactical positioning is important. I do think it is useful to have a grid, to have that and to be able to explain that, and that's probably, again, as Jude says, you can do it without it, but I think that aspect of the game is built with that in mind. So you're best served to have at least something. So I like to have a grid that I can at least do that. I don't use it until I have combat, typically. If people are exploring, theater of the mind, absolutely. Or until something complex comes up where it's like, actually, I can't word it enough to make you understand in your head what this place is. So let's draw.
I used to be very much, you guys know, I'm very much more the theater of the mind thing, and this was right down to combat stuff. One thing I actually really enjoy is actually getting to a combat and actually running it through in my head and doing it. But obviously that's still up here, and whatever description I'm going to, players are still going to be like, okay, where exactly am I in the room? Yeah. But I used to be just like drawing, rip a sheet up and just kind of, there's an X, that's you. But I know like one of our friends, Joe, used to bring over a grid kind of thing, and I did around the time of Fifth Ed coming out begin kind of mixing it in a bit, and with one of the things being that the players obviously will get the maximum out of their actual abilities. And okay, now am I 60? Actually, it reminds me, Dave, am I 60 foot away from him? Yes, Dave, you're 60 foot away. yeah. But now, so I kind of mix it up a little bit in person now. Since we went on to Roll20, I think I've kind of slipped back into. I try to avoid. I actually on the digital tool sets, I just find it slows down things a little bit. I suppose I guess it does at the table to some degree too, but definitely for like boss fights and big kind of things, I like to let players know where they are and have it all worked out. But that's a change with me. Sorry.
The other one I do like is music.
Yeah.
As a mood setting, tonal setting, I just like to have music on in the background. I have, you know, we've all spent time kind of looking at what's good music for a D&D session, you know, and I've gone as far as kind of having, okay, here's the battle music, and here's the mysterious secrets music, and here's the, you know, idling in the village, and here's the whatever.
I think back in the day when I think I ran Cthulhu for you, we had a perfect mix of Cthulhu and Portishead.
That's right. Yeah.
And it just seemed to work really well. I was like, this is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. There's something slightly retro about their sound, I think, sometimes. You know, he's got that torch singer kind of thing going on. So yeah, I think.
Well, with the music, and I think you actually said this to me recently in a conversation. I think really honestly, I could say I've maybe only ever had one scenario where I had music cues set up and I remembered to hit the button and hit play because it was part of I was doing basically a Helm's Deep session, and I had music for this part and this part just because I knew it was going to be like a big battle and I wanted to break it up a little bit. But you said to me recently like that's this other bit of, oh, I have to remember to do this and do this. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, like being a DM, like I say, you've got to do those important social things of like making sure everyone's having a good time, keeping an eye on where you are in your scenario, what's coming next. Do you have to flag something? Is there something people can find? The actual technical intricacies of what's going on. Do I need to have people making perception checks? And then to have to do music cues or lighting or whatever else you might be doing. Yeah. It's a lot, and it requires quite a bit of prep to really make that flow. So I have kind of peeled down my music cues. So I typically have a D&D soundtrack. I just like.
I also think like personally, I prefer these days to have it be purely soundtrack, no
vocal stuff,
no vocals, or at least, you know, nothing. I don't want to put on some sort of rock stuff and people begin singing that, because then they're not listening to what I'm talking about. They're listening to.
Well, the key is to not play earworms for your.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So these days, now, having said that, I mean, you know, when I'm doing fantasy, Fellowship of the Ring soundtrack isn't far away from going to get played.
And get stuck on, yeah,
this kind of stuff. That's you know.
Well, I plug Sirenscape at this point. So Sirenscape is an amazing tool if you're a starting GM. They offer like scenario specific for Pathfinder and D&D and Starfinder music sets, but they also have a wealth of generic sound sets and sound backgrounds. A good chunk of which comes free, and then you can purchase particular bundles like tavern noises and that sort of stuff. It's very good. I will say, for me, I had a recent session a couple of months ago that was elevated by the soundtrack, and that was I've got a group playing Baldur's Gate to Avernus, and very early on the game, they come to a tavern, with a famous tavern in Baldur's Gate, where this banshee sings this song every so often, and it's a song about Baldur himself, her love lost at sea, blah blah blah. But you know, something's wrong, and she sings a different song. She sings the Fall of Elturel, and on YouTube they had classically trained singers recorded singing it.
Wow.
And I was able to play it over Roll20 for my players, and there was just like silence while people listened to the song play, and because obviously it's very foreboding for the plot and that sort of stuff like that. But like, it was great. It was just like a hush for a moment while everyone just sat and listened to this haunting music and the story that she's telling, you know. And it was a great moment, like, of using sound as a sort of like both a plot point, you know, and just a dramatic moment to grab your players.
I've got a couple of games recently. Twilight 2000 is one that they released a soundtrack to go with it. They have a soundtrack that was written specifically for it. The 7C game, they've released there's an album of like sea shanties recorded on that, so I have a folder. So it's definitely, there's stuff out there for people and stuff specifically for some games, you know. But as you said, you can come across these real gems online, and actually on YouTube there's so many like soundtrack bits and kind of just people who put up their own music or music from games and stuff that is basically just soundtracks up, but is perfect if you're looking for, okay, I got a combat scene, go on YouTube and you'll find some stuff like that, you know. So really, really good. Can I ask you, is there any tips or techniques that you would share that you use at the table. Now we've talked a little bit, but I'm talking about maybe from a story point of view. Again, maybe we might be overlapping what we're just saying there. Any other kind of tips or techniques in regards telling a story, or in regards how to manage a table, how to monitor what's going on, or to involve people, keep people involved? That's fairly broad, but can I throw that at Jude maybe first, if you feel like it should?
Well, I'm going to hark back to something that Dave said about me earlier, and that's involving keeping the players involved and the individual players. One of the things you don't like to see as a GM is sometimes players can be hoggers of the limelight, not necessarily intentionally, but they can be the person, activating all the traps or opening all the doors, and all of a sudden, it becomes a 1 or 2 man show. It's really important as a GM that you don't lose some of your players along the way, and that's why I feel like at the various beats, stop and question what your players are doing, what their choices are, what they're up to. Now, if they want to say, I'm just going to follow, Larry and do what he's doing, but let it be their choice that's what they're doing. But give them the opening, so go around the table and say, hey, so while Larry is trying to deactivate the trap, what are you doing, Sarah? And, let that blossom from there. Give them the chance rather than just everybody waits and watches that one person do something. That's to me, that's crucial, because I feel some role players are lost early when they first start role playing, because they don't know the rules as well. They don't know what they should be doing, so they're not going to jump forward with their ideas. They're going to be very sort of like, I'm just going to stay quiet, and then they're lost. They become part of us just watching it as production.
Usually when I have new players at the table, you're obviously trying to let people still have the freedom to do what they want, but I do find just what you're just saying, those new players tend to be the ones that are quiet and aren't going to put their hand up. So usually my approach to that kind of thing is to actually throw them a few suggestions, kind of going, would you like to try this? I mean, this might be good. Your character's pretty good at this. Would you like to do that? Again, it's still up to them to say yay or nay to that, but it just gives them something, because sometimes people, you get overwhelmed and everyone else knows what's going on. I'm not really sure. What do I roll? What are all these things? So I think throwing those little nuggets of possibilities, literally choose your own adventure. Here's option A or B. Would you like to try one of those? That might help, And the other thing I think too, and this is a little bit of psychology, I suppose, is like when things go well for that player, point it out, go, awesome, that was really cool, man, excellent, you really did that well.
I was just thinking that I will tend to not necessarily favor, but I will tend to make a point of illustrating in game when a new player tries something and does something, even if it fails, to show them they have agency in the world. You try to pull the sword, and if they manage to pull the sword out, it swings out and it glitters in the sky, and you hold your hands, sweating your brow. Just give them a whole thing, give them a moment to like, yeah, great. Okay, well, what are we going to do next?
It's one of the most magic things. As again, we're talking about from the GM point of view of looking at a table, and you see that new player have that moment, and I almost, when I have someone new at the table, that's usually the bit that I'm going to walk away from that session being most happy with. Is like, yeah, you see them, you can still see people react, and when they get that first hit or they roll their first crit, and you tell them, yeah, you've defeated the boss, or you've uncovered the vital clue that we needed for this. It wouldn't have happened except for you. They'll take that, as you said, and it's a moment, and that's a little bit, that's the worm. That's the one that will kind of go, actually, I had great fun, I'm going to come back and play this. Are you doing this again next week? I'll join you again.
I think GMing is a little bit like a virus, or role-playing games in general. Once you get bit by the bug, you want to pass it on. You just want everyone to have this experience. You're going to be a GM. I'm kind of, it's a kind of thing. I'm like, I want to be able to like show people that it's doable. It's completely doable. I can remove it. There's a mysticism. Like, we're having a conversation as a bunch of GMs. There's nothing special about us, a bunch of GMs. Like, and we all have our own different approaches, and there's definitely stuff that we would disagree on in terms of how we would do a game. But the only table that matters is the one that you are running. And if they are having fun, then you're a successful goddamn GM. That's it. So anyone can do it. Anyone can pick it up and do it. You just gotta have some basics. Just really know what you're going to do. And I would say for first time, I'm drifting into maybe a separate conversation. I don't know if you want to, but for a first time GM, to really just nail down what that scenario is. You don't necessarily have to railroad it, but really keep the scope real small. Just do a thing. Like Matt Koval has a really good set of videos of running the game, and he just goes through the first couple of videos. And the man has huge encyclopedic knowledge of D&D, and he'll get lost in the weeds. But this particular set of videos is just really good on how just set it up something real simple. Get people hooked, and they'll follow the thing. And that's all it is. Just getting started is the hardest part. Absolutely the hardest part. And in terms of like, people are nervous. I'm still nervous. When I'm going to run a game, I am still nervous. And I have run literally hundreds of games. I've run loads of systems. And every time I come to the game, like whether it's like the game on Thursday night with you guys, who folks I've known for years and years, or different with D&D because I'm a player, so I can just relax and kick back. I can rock up with no preparation, whatever, and that's great fun. But my own D&D, which is like a kind of a rolling roster of players, and we all go off on little adventures, kind of
a bastion,
West Marches kind of thing. So it's like, it's just a particular setting, and you go off and people can drop in, drop out. But I specifically kind of set that up to have new players come in and have an avenue go into it. But even with that, so I'm a relatively experienced GM. I don't have the encyclopedic knowledge that, for example, you'd have. I wouldn't have the kind of excellent sense of space and theatrics that you have, Wayne. But I do have some good experience, and I'm pretty good at knowing a table. But I just, every single time, because it's something I made, because it's something from me, nerves. 100%.
Well, I'd say Jude will be. I'm the same, man, every time. And I think that's it is a collaborative thing, but obviously the GM does have a lot more to deal with. He's got to bring it to the game. The players hopefully will give it back to you, and sometimes, let's be honest, there's scenarios, and it's kind of like, I know it's kind of like the horror movie. You should just turn on the light. You shouldn't go in there at all. But we're not going to get to watch it. This won't entertain us. We're going to go into that place. We'll let this happen.
D&D is super boring. If the guy comes stumbling into the bar and hands the guys the letter, and they go, Jesus, nope.
Yeah.
That's not a good session, guys.
Yeah, but you do. Yeah, I mean, you still. Yeah, I mean, your friends or these people you've never met or whatever, a mix of both, are giving up their evening to do this, and we're doing it all together, social thing. But you do feel like, God, I hope they enjoy this and they work. And to be honest, we're saying we've all been GMing for years, but I mean, you'll still have. I keep on liking it to the TV show kind of thing of like, you'll have a great series, but there's going to be the odd dud episode, and hopefully it won't drag it all down. And usually, to be honest, it doesn't. And people are still going on about that one particular episode that was just mind blowing. I love that episode. You were going on about the Star Wars. Okay, that the other sessions weren't great, but that one, I want more of those. Let's play, because if that happens again, I want to be there.
And you can be experienced, but you can also pick up a completely new RPG or a new adventure that doesn't play to your strengths, and you go, wait, can I do whimsy? Like, that's not in my wheelhouse. And you start again almost along the same travel of like, you're nervous, you're like, am I able to give my players the right sense of like maybe horror, that I'm trying to get, that's trying to be put across in the story. And I think you go back to square one almost in one sense as a DM, because you're like, this doesn't play to my strengths, but I'm going to do it. We're going to have fun. I'm going to try, and you go with it,
and that's it. I mean, there's so many games. I think years ago I would have thought, D&D, I know how to run a D&D game, I can run anything. But then you wake up and realize, actually, no, Cthulhu has a completely different focus. Vampire is a completely different ambience and things. So I actually have to change all my mindset. I'm not going to do a dungeon crawl in Vampire. It's more this, I'm not going to do this in that game. And there's some games that, like, I'll definitely not be able to do that style of adventure there, so yeah, you have to kind of, set yourself challenges, but then when you come to them, it's like, oh my God, this is completely different. And that's kind of cool. I kind of like actually picking up a new game and kind of going, what's this going to bring that I haven't done before?
That's almost exactly. So you played this when we started doing kind of the Thursday night thing, and we had done the 7C, and I had Night Witches sitting there for a long time.
Gotcha.
And it's this played, PBTA, so, Powered by the Apocalypse game. So it's quite a different style. Even your Shadowruns, even your various other games, all run maybe the same direction. Call of Cthulhu, vaguely the same direction. This thing is different in terms of how it frames the game. The players, they're not rolling to hit something. They're doing a move. They're doing narrative things. They have more control over what happens in the environment. And you know, something that new players often don't quite understand exactly how much they have control of. They kind of say, well, I pull the lever down. Well, actually, you don't pull the lever down. It's behind this fence. You can't just, you know, they have to be explained what the parameters of the world and how they interact with the world. It's a bad example. But anyways, whereas PBTAs, it gives more agency to the players to say, well, actually, there is such and such here, and there is, this person is angry at me. And then you're all trying to weave the story together. And it's much scarier because, like, you don't have, as a GM, quote unquote, you don't have that control over the characters and the NPCs in the scenario. There's a little bit handed over to players, but once we got over the initial hiccups, and what there was, like, it was rough going to get going initially to kind of get our heads around that mechanic. Once we got going, we found our the tempo of the game, at least for us. Like, you know, I'm sure people play that game very differently to how we played it, but we used the mechanics and we found a nice tempo for the game, and we got into a groove with it. And I think it was one of my favorite games.
Oh, yeah, that was actually, I would put that up in probably one of my top 5 RPG experiences ever. Like, it was just that particular system, but the storytelling. And actually, also, I think, Jude, you were saying earlier that you were sharing GMing in your first campaign. Is that, you said something about rolling?
Oh, not in the campaign. We were alternating games. So
okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that particular system, that was interesting because I'd never had a game where we're kind of playing the same campaign, but we had, what, it was yourself, myself, and Caddy. We kind of took the GMing role for particular chapters, which was interesting too. Like, it was kind of like, okay, and we all had our own kind of slightly, again, style approach to it, but like the core part of it was really, really nice.
What was lovely, like that. What was lovely about that was it's you know, you're playing the game as collaborative, but from a GM point of view, you don't typically get to collaborate on the overall arc, but you could see what the other GM had done last session, and you're still playing the same character, same way. You get to riff off that stuff and build on it and see. Get the things that came up in that last scenario. Well, you know, you know, the major of this particular wing is unhappy with you guys. By the way, he's back. You know,
like that the one thing I particularly remember that campaign, and it was like, what, 6 or 7 episodes, but the one thing I particularly remember was actually that final episode. I was actually emotional at the table. I was GMing that last session, but I was actually emotional at the table because I'd seen the character arc of some of these people, and that was lovely. I think definitely going back, and I think some of that might be linking into things like Critical Role these days, which have obviously become kind of mainstream. People can look up games online and watch how different GMs do it and all this kind of stuff. But also that whole thing of the narrative thing and storytelling, as going back to what we're talking about, has become a lot more in there too. So I had watched this arc of these characters over the weeks, and they weren't just a bunch of stats by that last session. I was like, I'm really invested in these people.
Yeah. You know them, you know what to expect, and it's like, here's the situation. How is this character going to really deal with that? You know.
I want to say as well, just techniques. Something that I like to use actually is one I came across in the old Star Wars West End games. Star Wars was the idea of an adventure script, and I think I'm not sure if you do it, Jude, but I definitely know Dave has done it in the past, where you actually have an opening scene that you've written. Possibly sometimes in the West End games version, you would actually have players read the individual characters. And I've come back to that several times over the years. Even last year, we were doing like Cyberpunk, and I would open up the session with a kind of like a written cutaway scene that kind of was linking into what was going on, or some sort of something was going to pass. And I did it the same with like 7C. That's a particular thing I like, is like framing it. And I think that also acts as a little bit of a clapperboard in terms of we're starting.
Well, since we're talking about starting, I think an important story there is session zeros, you know, which have become, which were not a thing when I started. You know, they weren't really a thing, but I think they become an increasingly important part of the game, particularly now that it's become so narrative focused in most of these games. I think it's very important for players to have that communal character creation, agreement on where the story is going to go, and just a general discussion on how they know each other, so that you can almost start in media res, you know, not quite, you know, but you're starting with players who acknowledge each other, who are already part of a team. They're not getting to know each other for the first time necessarily. You have built something, and also, of course, discussed, the X card, things that are not going to be broached in the game. If there's lines for people to make sure they're not crossed. I think session 0 is now, even if it's only short, if it's only an hour, and my session 0 tend to be relatively short. And I always also use it to cover rules at the moment for Roll20 because people will be playing it for the first time. But I do think it's become integral to the to playing the game now. Is having that like pre-session scenario, particularly if you've got new players.
I think back in I'm kind of on board with you on this. Particularly, I think we've been doing that a lot with the as we said, the Thursday night crew. Now we've had these, which is nice because in the past, definitely in D&D, it was kind of like gen up your characters. We want to get started tonight, and we'll just have some random stuff happen to begin. But you didn't really know who they were. Just a bunch of stats still, and you kind of people found their way through it. But I definitely, in particular with the Thursday night kind of group we've done those session zeros, and it's nice then, and it actually gives the GM a chance to get his head together in terms of how do these people mix. I like Twilight 2000, but I actually didn't do that recently with the first session of that game, Dave, and I think that kind of caught me off because then I hadn't really thought out how those people link, and that's whereas then other ones like we'd actually sat down the week before, so I had an idea. Okay, I've got a sea captain here, I've got a swordsman here, I've got this guy who's broken out from prison here, the noble. How am I get these all to link together?
That was a lovely literal start of the game then when we actually started that first scenario, because we all started off from such we knew exactly who we were.
Exactly.
And we knew, as players, we knew the backgrounds of the other characters enough that like, okay, this is, I get what's roughly happening here. None of you are surprised. None of you are kind of scrambling to find your feet. You're just like, okay, let's go do it, And we knew what the premise of the game was. You knew the genre of the game, and I think that comes back to something you mentioned, Jude. If you're doing something that's, out of your wheelhouse or whatever, having everyone buy into like, look, this is a horror game. And that means that, X, Y, and Z, you're crunchy. It means that you will be scared of the monster. There's no like, you might do it as a dramatic beat, but like as a rule, you're not going to sit down and slug with the monster, even while the system might let you do it. Yeah. Once you know that, you're going to have a lot more fun because everyone's on the same page,
It does. Jude referenced something, and maybe whoever might be watching this mightn't be aware of it. You referenced something that's kind of fairly new in role-playing games, but the idea of the X card and of kind of just being more aware of what to be said and what are no-go zones in a story for your players. That's something that can be definitely obviously brought up in a session 0. I've actually never had that conversation with my group, but in my case, I guess I know everyone enough, and I know things that I personally just will not bring into a table. I'm not going to play out. I'm not going to play out the torture scene, guys. I don't want to do that. We'll just make a roll. We'll do an intimidation thing. I don't want to play out. I don't want to be sitting there describing how you torture your guy. If it's that kind of thing.
But there are streams, so sometimes it's something just that a person may carry a phobia with them.
Exactly.
That they just like, my wife is very afraid of spiders, and to the point where I just don't bring them into my games if she's playing, because even the thought of it, and I tend to make spider noises. But as you said, like if you know your group, you know that they'll be vocal enough to say, okay, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But you have to be cognizant of the newer players.
Yes.
And the X card is a way of giving someone like, you don't have to say anything more, just hold this card up and I'll divert what I'm talking about and go down a different path, So like to me, again, establishing that in the session 0, particularly with new players is critical. And I will say for GMs, and we were talking about GM tips earlier, session 0 is an amazing way to get plot points, for future reference. You have your players talking to each other, telling them about each other's background, about, who they are, what they want to be, and you write that down and you can see that into, even if it's a pre-scripted adventure, you can take what those players are saying and seed it into your adventures, have callbacks to things they say. You can make it a more personal campaign for the players, and I think particularly with new players that will matter, to them.
Yeah, we did a Cyberpunk campaign there earlier this year, and I definitely, having all that pretty much generated what that campaign ended up being. Like we had corrupt cops because there was an ex-cop who'd been thrown out. It was like, okay, how will I get him in? And we had all these kind of things. Just I was trying to weave them all in. So having that all prepped the week before or 2 weeks before, whatever it was brilliant. Even though it was like a nightmare setting up characters, you have to do your whole life back. Oh my god. What else do I want to say? Introducing new. We're kind of touching on a lot of things. I had a bunch of questions, but we're kind of jumping into. We're referencing a lot of these things. So
we're doing a sandbox. That's what we're doing.
Sandbox. That's allowed wander. Sorry, Dave. Do you want to say something there? I thought you were about
to. Kind of, yeah. So just on those tools, and I know you want to move on to something else, but you mentioned scripts. So the scripts, I use those. I completely ripped that off from you doing it back in Star Wars. That's where I got it from. I've used that for a couple of games, but the other thing which I've also stolen is the cinematics. So where you have a cutaway, the players aren't involved necessarily, or the players are involved and you're seeing something where they're not in control, like a cutscene in a video game, where you see something. And I find they're great for like bookending a scenario, particularly if maybe nothing particular is crucially wrapping up narratively in the story in the game session. Maybe they just had combat and it's minor, they're away somewhere. Have a moment to the evil villain in his lair, looking into the scrying glass, they're coming, we'll be ready. And that's great, that sets them up in the next session. Okay, everyone's on edge,
Well, I don't know if you remember, but in the Cyberpunk campaign they had a base down the street, and there was I was a scribe, I was just trying to what I was trying to do, and it worked in the end, was like I was just trying to give a bit of flavor of what the street is like. And there's shops here, and there's this preacher in a box, and he's preaching every day. I just became, there's a preacher again. But then that was all building up, because at the end of one of the sessions I had the cutaway of the preacher going around, literally taking off his stuff, and he's an undercover cop, and he's been watching them all the way. And that completely set up then the next session. The boys had seen this cutaway, but obviously their characters had not seen the cutaway, so they were aware where they're being watched, things are beginning to mount down. But like, yeah, they can be nice little tools to do things too. Also, I guess, we can touch on loads of things here, but having like a list of character names definitely is I think that's a standard one. Have that list of like random names, because at some point they're going to want to talk to someone that isn't in the pre-written book or isn't in your notes. It's like, oh god, who's this? And I guess you want to make it look like you completely planned this. And I guess the other thing is handouts. Handouts is another thing that's nice. I don't use them a lot personally, but on occasion it is nice to give people something tactile. If they've got a newspaper, if they've found a note, there you go. I mean, this kind of stuff is cool, and you do see people all kind of go, oh, wow, and they bore over these things, even if it's only going to be there for a few minutes. You're kind of sitting there as a GM, you're like, yeah, that was worth the several hours I did of putting that together and burning it and coffee staining it and all this kind of stuff. Is there any other kind of stuff like that then? Just little other kind of things that you do or you kind of have in the background? I'm just gonna check in if there's nothing else.
Yeah, nothing broad. I suppose just another thing that you can do, maybe people don't necessarily, you don't necessarily know these things off the top of your head as a new GM, but you can absolutely ask players to leave the room and speak to one player individually, and that's great for building attention. It's not something you want to do all the time because it's unwieldy. The other thing that you're allowed to do as a GM is just end the game early. If you find that you're starting to get into a place where like you're going to be wandering and it's going to be substandard, you're allowed to stop. It doesn't happen very often, and I've done it a couple of times on like a Thursday night once, where like it's no big deal. Folks can just have their evening back. I'll wrap it a little bit early just because it's got to a nice point, and going further would diminish what you've had, and we can do it next time. It would just be great. Just go play a board game or something else instead. You can absolutely just stop and do something else.
Jude, out in there, you want to contribute?
Yeah, no, I would have to say, and to go on from Dave, is I would say not just ending the game, you can end the campaign. If the game is not working out for you, if the players aren't gelling, if you're not having a good time, it is okay to stand back. You're not committed to these people, okay? Obviously, you want your friends to have a good time. You want to have a good time. If for whatever reason that balance isn't right, if someone's not gelling with the group, it's okay to draw a line under it. Maybe you start up a new campaign. Maybe you change out one or two players. Maybe, you decided it isn't for you. But, just because you started doesn't mean you have to finish. And that's important as a GM. Don't feel like you're trapped. Right? You are not trapped and your players are not trapped. You're doing this for fun. Always remember you're doing this to enjoy yourself. And the minute you start not enjoying yourself, something's wrong. So just be cognizant of that. But my tip for my big tip for a new GM who's running a printed scenario is you don't have to memorize the whole scenario. Okay, like by all means read the book, skim through it a second time if you want, but at the end of each session have an idea of where your players are going. Read that bit, know that bit. Everything else, you can fluff it, but don't try to memorize
I,
everything.
I also, sorry.
The corollary of that is you do have to read the next bit. You do have to know,
Yes,
at least broadly, what's happening next, because you don't want to go, no, you don't find any traps, and then read the next page. You go, oh, actually, whatever it might be. Yeah,
and it's perfectly okay to say, oh, I made a mistake there, guys. I didn't notice this. Put your hand up. It doesn't derail things. I remember someone, I think it was Caddy, saying one night that one of her key NPCs got killed or something like this, and she was like, oh, what do I do? Like, he's apparently like he's very important. I said to her, just make up another guy, give him a different name.
I'm
same guy with different name.
cousin.
Yeah, or do that's maybe the extreme, but like, don't worry, it's not derailed. You can do stuff. You're not tied into things.
I don't know if you've watched any of the D&D Logic videos. They're run by the guys who leave Dirt League and stuff. They're very funny. They did this. They finished for the first season, but there's the wizard in that keeps dying and comes up with the first letter of his name changed. He's back. Oh, it's my cousin. Borin died. It's his cousin Corin. And then, oh no, Corin, I'm your second cousin Doran. Come to save you. Maybe not so blatant, but yeah, your NPCs can live again through another person. If you need to get plot across, and your party murders the person with the plot, which literally happened in one of the games I'm running, you can find a way to get that plot to them, be it by a secondary NPC or there are ways.
And sometimes you can get some, like, it's in those moments that you actually find a real bolt of inspiration that can actually like really be like, oh, that was amazing. And everyone was like, and then you tell them later, well, actually that wasn't planned at all. I had to do this to cover up that. Sorry, Dave, you want to say something there?
No, I'm just nodding in total agreement.
I'm just thinking, I'm just watching the time, but so Dave, I think you mentioned already Matt Colville, his stuff. There's also obviously he's held up the Matt Mercer stuff, but I'm just thinking that there is like a GM tips series that he did. I think Satine Phoenix ended up taking that over for a while. There might be some more. Jude, do you have any come off your head? I'll probably put up a few links at the end of this anyway.
There's a lot of good ones, and sometimes the best thing to do, even ahead of tips, is just watch some of them play out. I mean, my first recommendation ahead of Critical Role, everything is to watch Dimension 2020, to watch six comedians have just a genuine laugh. In the very first season they run, only one person at the table has played D&D. But you just watch them have fun with the characters, and then everything else falls into place, and it's the same with the DM. They're suggesting stuff that you can see you can literally see the steam coming out of his ears at certain points for the choices his players are making, but he makes it work, and you can see from him how a GM can just adapt, so your players didn't go the route you thought. You've got two choices. You can invent an entirely new route, or you can, create that imaginary sort of loop that brings them back to where you wanted them to be in the first place.
And that, the first time that something derails, it can be a bit like, but to be honest, I think over time, as you get more practice of this stuff, you kind of, you're less in well, I don't find myself so much in a panic when things don't go as I thought they would, because to be honest, it's going to happen on your first session. They're going to do something, or they're going to do several things that aren't in your notes, that aren't there, and you're just going to have to improv. And that's the skill set you build up to. And actually, even there is probably, I mean, Dave, you're involved in drama now as well. Like, but there's obviously, if you want to get into that end of it, there are so many resources for looking up improvisation, and even as just even watching people improvising, comedians and stuff. How do they improvise? Where do the ideas come out of?
I think that the main thing I would take from an improv perspective, is that kind of rule of take what the person has given you and embellish it. So if they try to do something that is not possible, it's not within the bounds of the game, let them try it. Let them and show them the results, and give them some little bit of narrative to go along with. Like, give them something. Just flat no isn't really much good to anybody. It just stops things. So if you can kind of give, even if it's just the in-game explanation for why you try this and it doesn't work, great, you know.
And a little bit going into the tips kind of thing. Whenever I get an RPG, I almost always flick to the GM section first to see if there's any new little nuggets of a GM tip or something I haven't seen before. So, like I said, the Star Wars, the West End Games thing was new to me, and there's a few other things like, having a deck of tarot cards or some sort of imagery there that we've all played that board game. There's a board game called Dixit, and you look at the cards, everyone's looking at the same cards, but everyone draws something different from it. So that could be good. Something like that just behind the screen is like, oh, it's like, okay, I'm just going to flip this, and you might come up with something. Having a chart. I mean, I'm going on about this Iron Sworn game I love at the moment, but basically there's full of oracle charts, which are all there just to kind of throw ideas at you. So in those moments where things derail a bit, you maybe have something here that will just give you what you need at the moment. And the books themselves, most of the RPGs have lots of stuff there, lots of advice in them, particularly for those moments. And just read what's in there. Sorry, Dave.
If you're rolling your own, if you're doing your own game and you've got control of the vertical and horizontal, the absolute best place for inspiration is your players. They're going to sit there and speculate at what the plot of the bad guy is, and you go, "That's great. I love that. That's what he's doing now." Actually, yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was my plan all along.
Absolutely.
I remember it's satisfying for the players. Right? I was right.
I remember years ago doing my Lagota, my vampire thing years ago, and that was interesting because it was, I had the location, the city designed to a point that I had all these things, and we got to a point that people have been playing it so long during those college years that I literally would show up with, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to have this event happen, but after that, I'll see what happens. But they were throwing out the nuggets, and I, as you just said, I would just sit there and listen, go, oh yeah, that'll work. Yeah, that's good. Okay, but of course, completely all part of the plan, guys. Very good. Yeah,
that's it. A lot of it is that it is like the verisimilitude of everything. You've got the control of everything. Every detail. It's just about making it's a bit of showmanship and a bit of confidence. It goes a long way in GM.
But it also illustrates the one thing here: the GM is just one person at the table. Everyone else is just as important to creating that story, whether it's the random idea they go out that gives the GM something, or what they do, or where the plot derails and the GM has to drag it here and suddenly find something that he had never planned or she had never planned and is amazing and becomes the thing that people talk about. Remember that scene? And he's there like, yeah, completely made that up, but that was brilliant, So yeah.
And I will say on that, and it's a very important thing that I like to discuss in session 0 or the first session of a game, is that it's collaborative. We're sitting down to play through a story, be it homebrew or here we're going to play through Storm King's Thunder. It's important to remind the players you're working together to play through that story. If you start acting against the interests of the story and your fellow players, I mean, you need to rein that in. We want our players to have agency and to make the choices that they want, but you have to remind them, and it's a good place to start in session 0 at the very beginning, saying, we're here to play the story. So at least be cognizant of the fact that sometimes it mightn't be the decision that you wanted to make, but you need to make it so that the game flows, because we're playing together.
I've had that. I would play with younger kids, like when I'm showing, I've shown D&D in libraries and stuff, and you do get that. I'm almost used to it now, and where the new players like, I can do this. Oh yeah, I attacked the innkeeper. It's like, but why? And yeah, you have to kind of get across, okay, you could do that, but it's not really going to help. And so yeah, be aware that you're working together. And even though you can do it, doesn't necessarily mean you should do it, and it won't maybe serve the story. So I guess the whole thing, as you're saying, is just like, remember, it's the story that we're trying to serve, and if we serve that together and do it, and at least everyone makes a little bit of an effort to come into it, we're going to create something that's going to be really, really memorable, and we're going to be talking about, as we still talk about certain games we've played over the years, for years to come later, and it becomes this thing. It's a wonderful shared experience to have. These are some of my best memories of socializing with my friends, are playing the Star Wars or playing a Cthulhu or whatever it was, and we did that together, and we can laugh and do whatever about it. And no one, you can say that to people, but to be actually part of that is something very, very precious, you know. I'm just aware of the time, so I don't want to go too I think we kind of we weaved a lot of stuff in here. It weaved a bit. I had all questions, but we kind of touched on everything that I was going to bring up in some sort of way. And we could probably talk on a lot more about more tips and more techniques, and probably we'll walk away from this go, oh, I should have mentioned this. But as we were kind of saying there is a load of stuff online. There is now obviously with the resurgence of D&D, with things like Critical Role, Dimension 20 I haven't watched now, but there's other ones that aren't half as famous as those guys, but they're up online and you can watch the games being played. You can watch the GM running the game and get a sense of how to do it, and you'll see the variety of styles that are there, and you'll find a style that'll fit you. Sometimes that will take a bit of time. You know, you might try the visual thing and go, I don't have the budget, or no, I'd rather be doing this on my head. You might love the theater, you know. So all that is the stuff that comes with time. I guess at the end of the day, don't be daunted by GMing. It's a hugely rewarding thing at the table. I think you guys agree with me there. I mean, in terms of
absolutely.
Yeah.
It can, as you say, it can be a bit getting across that threshold of starting and getting the first. Once you get some momentum, you'll get through it, you know, and you just get better and better and better at it. You know, you begin to understand it better. You'll know the system better. You'll know the people you're playing with better. You'll be able to play to your strengths and play to their strengths, and you'll have a great time.
Absolutely.
And you do not have to know everything. And it's okay to say, I don't know what that rule is. I'm going to play it as X for this session. I look it up, and next session, you know, we can play with the correct ruling or whatever. But we're not going to stop the narrative. We'll do it this way this time. Move on.
And the underlying thing, again, as Dave was saying a lot there as well, is just have fun. I mean, that's what you're there. You're hanging out with your friends, have your pizza. It's a game. Yeah. I mean, you know. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me here tonight. And anyone who's watching, thank you so much. This is one of a series of little chats that we've done over the last year. So there's some other chats up, and we're hoping to do a few more in the coming year. But in the meantime, I guess, stay safe and stay well, and hopefully we'll chat you all again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.